Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bach. Today is September 10th, 2021, and this is a special edition of the Coronavirus Conversation, part of my page, Viral Conversation. We usually do a Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time broadcast, but there just seemed to be a swirl of questions that people are asking. There's a lot of agitation. There was a presidential address or a mandate, which probably is not legal, that everybody as a federal employee must be vaccinated. And I think any company with more than 100 employees needs to make sure that they have their employees vaccinated. It's a little bit kind of like Obamacare, but on a very kind of personal basis, fairly intrusive. The question about immunity that somebody asked was whether there's going to be legal immunity for those companies if there are problems with the employees after vaccination. There has been kind of a blanket legal immunity that was given to the vaccine manufacturers. I'm not sure whether that will extend to companies, but who knows? Magic things have happened governmentally lately. We've had stimuli of trillions of dollars. We've had rent absolutions, moratoria, that somehow people don't have to pay rent because the federal government says so. I don't think there's legality there. Churches have been closed. I don't think there's much legality there. There have been mandates about what you can do in your own kind of commercial space. I'm not sure whether those extend to private spaces, and there's an arguable point whether companies are private or public. Anyway, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a medical primary care doctor, and I'm not, truth be told, an expert per se on immunology, virology, epidemiology, or a few other ologies. I'm trying, though, to apply a common sense approach to this illness, and I think the questions play themselves out on the world stage and in different locales in different times, whether people want to see the answers or not. And oftentimes they do not want to see the answers because they already think they have the answer in advance. I think we're all prone to that to a certain extent. And I think a fair amount of conversation often involves validation of your own point of view, and people come into a conversation with a preconception. It's very hard to change people's minds. I think most people will change their minds only through experience. The more stubborn amongst us, the more experience is necessary. But the experiences are out there, and if you want to find, I guess, you can always find something in your favor, and if you can't find the facts, you can find some argumentation based on emotion and so forth. I recently had an email exchange with somebody who said kind of an untoward thing towards me because it's not worth really getting into. But I quoted the Carl Sandburg 19th century quote: "If you have if you don't have the law on your side, argue the facts. If the facts are not on your side, argue the law. If neither's on your side, then get up and bang the table and yell," something of that sort. That is oftentimes what people do. They will reach for ad hominem, invective, phrasing, that is to say insults at the person rather than argue the issue. So much of that we get currently. So what were the things that I wanted to make this special edition for? Well, part of it is the mandate that's recently been put out, whether that's valid and useful, and kind of maybe kind of dissect and peel back some of the layers of what, in fact, we are arguing about and what we're worried about currently. The issue has been the Delta variant, the Delta strain of coronavirus. I like to point out, as previously, the coronavirus is a long-term viral friend or frenemy of mankind, has been around probably longer than mankind itself, which has been around maybe in this form as Homo sapiens about 200,000 years, as one form or another of early hominids, maybe 1 million years, and viruses have been around longer. How did these, as a common cold, coronavirus doesn't really have an animal host, a reservoir from which to jump to humans, so it just kind of mutates over time. going from person to person, group to group, and so forth. That seems to be what's happening now. We're noticing this on a geographic basis, but these various strains, such as there are, if you know the Greek alphabet, there's alpha, beta, delta, gamma, epsilon, phi, theta, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, maybe lambda's in there. Maybe Eta, actually. Any rate, whatever they are, we can probably find that out separately. These strains have been mostly geographic variants from, slightly different from the so-called ancestral strain, which is the first round of coronavirus. Now, the SARS coronavirus did come from an animal host reservoir, bats or pangolins in Asia and mid-Asia, East Asia, and caused SARS-1 in 2003. Then they were isolated and kept in the laboratory, and I think this round is pretty clearly shown to have emanated not from an animal reservoir, but from a laboratory reservoir, which is not really specifically a human reservoir. And it was unleashed again, probably after some gain of function changes as precipitated by your US tax dollars and sent over to China and also North Carolina, but affected in Wuhan province, Wuhan City, China. So once it was released, it will do what viruses do, produce a lot of itself, and not every version of itself is going to be identical. So there are going to be slight changes. We see this across the animal kingdom, the plants and so forth. You can plant in your garden, a bunch of corn seeds, and they'll pretty much all look alike. Every now and then there'll be slight variant, and that's how we get new strains. We can crossbreed them and so forth, make hybrids and whatnot. It's not unusual to have viruses make multiple strains. Again, that's how the common cold stays common. It keeps slightly mutating, and since it makes, gazillions, I mean, that's not a real number, but trillions of replications, trillions of itself before being unleashed to the next person, or while being unleashed to the next person, it's perfectly capable, not really capable, but DNA or RNA as it gets replicated is going to make slight, and some of the errors, most of the errors are ineffective and cause lesser variants and lesser strains, but every now and then it's going to make something that is slightly successful just because it has trillions of attempts, and eventually one of them is going to be slightly better than the original. And not necessarily better, but just different in appearance, so it can get by your sensors, which might already have mounted an immune response to the original version. We're not really seeing that per se with this Delta strain. The people who have had immunity one way or another, either from the ancestral strain or the vaccine to the spike protein from the ancestral strain, which sounds kind of, I don't know, kind of like fantasy novel stuff, ancestral strain. It's not that ancestral. It's 1 year ago. It's January through kind of spring 2020. But places like New York City in the Northeast, New York State in general, that had big outbreaks in the spring of 2020 are not having big outbreaks now of Delta. That is the predominant strain, such as it is when it is around. Nonetheless, pretty much the whole country's, well, I think on a political basis, different parts of the country are going through different aspects of hypomania or hysteria, panic, whatever you want to call it, overreaction, masking up, going, through the whole rigmarole of so-called NPI, non-pharmacological interventions, in order to treat something that actually isn't there. This is a sadness. It's an absurdity, and I don't know what else to say. I was looking at the numbers. Massachusetts has a few thousand cases every day, and maybe 0 to 10 fatalities, and those aren't segregated out by death, but likely they are on the older end of the scale. It's not segregated out based on vaccination level, although again, it's probably because the older people are more vaccinated and the older people are getting sicker, and so some of the vaccinated people are going to get sick and die. Vaccine has been misinterpreted all along as some kind of magic thing that will, prevent some, virus completely. That's never been the case. I will show you some documentation very briefly, but it's always only been partial covering. And since you're only getting to be exposed one tiny piece of the vaccine, of the virus, it makes complete sense that you would not have the totality of reaction that you have with natural immunity. So let's go to the mat a little bit. I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to show you some stuff, technical word. I maybe we'll start on the concept of comparing natural and vaccine immunity. It's actually hard to get a good answer on this. I was inspired somewhat by a Facebook post of a friend who wrote in all good intention, serious question. Why should a person in good physical shape in his 20s with no medical issues who had COVID get the vaccine? And then he's looking for serious responses, and people gave them one way or another. I think they're all serious, but they run the gamut. Basically, shut up, get the vaccine. If you make any dispute, you're being labeled as an anti-vaxxer, whatever that is. Delta variant's really super serial, to quote the South Park version of Al Gore, which is an episode you should watch, by the way. And then there are various levels of other answers, and I'm not going to go far deep into them. But if you do want to get probably a decent answer, unfortunately, you have to go through the time warp. Let's do the time warp again. From what is, God, it's slipping with Meatloaf and so forth. At any rate, so my time warp is to use the time filter on Google, and let's just take a look at that very briefly. So this is up in the upper left corner here is before December 2019, and then you can ask the danger of vaccine after disease. So in Michigan, the state of Michigan is using kind of CDC stuff. This is their Department of Health comparing natural and vaccine immunity. I've read that natural immunity is getting the diseases safer and works better than getting vaccinated. So this is a two-part question. It depends on the disease, whether it's safer or not. Some diseases might be safer. It always works better than getting vaccinated. So the response here, it is true that natural infection almost always causes better immunity than vaccines. Okay, so you can take this to the bank. Whether you're going to see this answer today, this is from 2015, whether you're going to see this answer today is another story. But the natural answer is, and I've provided this a number of times, is if you live with somebody, let's say you join the Army and you're with somebody through boot camp for 6 or 8 weeks, you've seen that person fairly closely, you've heard his voice, you found his manners, you listen to his jokes, all that kind of stuff, as opposed to I don't know, a dog getting a scent of a piece of clothing. Now, maybe you can both identify the guy the next day. Maybe the dog's smell is better than your perceptions. But I think overall, you'll find a lot more cross-reactivity based on scent than you will on this totality of a person, so that you can recognize some people, even after they age. You go to a high school reunion, you still kind of recognize that person based on those other attributes, even though the physical appearance has changed. So fuller, experience with anything, vaccine, a virus, a bacterium, whatever, is going to give you better immunity than simply a vaccine. Although, if the illness is super severe and super serial, to quote South Park Al Gore, then you might very well want to get the vaccine instead. So this is a sliding scale with the coronavirus, because it can be super serious for oldsters and not really for youngsters. So it's really it's a bifurcated issue. The young people don't really have any problems. So back in the day, there were chickenpox parties. And chickenpox parties are risky, but they work because chickenpox is a very contagious disease. So why did they do this? Well, because there was no vaccine at the time, and frankly, the kids didn't get much of a problem, and you had a more severe problem older. So this was getting everybody sick on purpose. This was done. There's no reason that this couldn't have been the paradigm, especially in the year before the vaccine was released, and even in places where the vaccine might, have some impediments to achievement. Say sub-Saharan Africa or whatever, where there might not be the money, distribution, so forth, and people are young, they're skew young, and they're relatively healthy, for instance. No reason not to have the chickenpox party concept. This is mentioned in the Department of Health, Michigan. Now, it depends on the illness. So if you are talking about other illnesses that might be more severe for young people, you should get the vaccine young. So most of the ones that kids get now, Haemophilus, measles, mumps, rubella, those can bring severe childhood and early adulthood issues. So rubella doesn't really do much for kids, and they used to have German measles parties because kids didn't really get sick from the German measles, rubella, but young pregnant women could have kids with rubella syndrome, which is deafness, potential mental retardation, so forth. So why not get immunity earlier? So before the vaccine, they had rubella parties, German measles parties, just like the chickenpox parties, which is more severe as you get older and causes potentially shingles later on. So why not get it early? Okay, great. Haemophilus, same thing. Pertussis, tetanus, so forth. These can cause problems in childhood. Coronavirus does not cause problems in childhood. Coronavirus, COVID-19, does not cause problems for children. It is really a non-entity, and to inflict children with a vaccine, which has the potential, like any vaccine, of having side effects. Polio vaccine had side effects. Some people, got paralysis from the polio vaccine. It was modulated and changed over time, and slightly different strains because it's a live virus. And that was one of the problems early on with polio vaccine. Was it still worthwhile getting the aggregate? Well, yes, because children got potential paralysis, so as did adults. So if you have a childhood danger, then you could very well consider getting a childhood vaccine. If you have a teenage, etc., you can consider it. But this kind of one-size-fits-all approach is moronic, and it's malpractice, frankly. And you can put all the kind of governmental immunity on a legal basis wherever you want, but that won't change the fact that people may very well not necessarily all die, but get illnesses and problems on a greater level than they would from the virus itself. So everybody under 25, the vaccine's more dangerous than the virus. How do you know that? Check the data from Israel. They've already amended the way they do vaccines for young people. They may amend it back, but myocarditis is a real thing. And it happens, very rarely, 1 in 20,000 cases, but that is more dangerous than that from the virus itself for young people. So natural immunity is better. It's a fuller immunity. You should have chickenpox parties, German measles parties, etc. for everyone who's young. This thing will pass around like the common cold. It's the same size as the common cold. It does exactly what the common cold does once it's out in the community. Will it keep mutating enough that we won't be getting rid of it? I don't think so. Because it doesn't have an animal host, and if it's more severe, it needs kind of a rest time for humans to recover before it gets communicated again. Part of what we're doing, though, is giving it that opportunity of multi-year window. If we had let everyone get naturally immune early on, we probably wouldn't be seeing this at all anymore. It would be more like the influenza. It comes with some particular strain, it disappears, it needs an animal host in order to come back because it's gone. It's been conquered because people got sick enough. They had the illness. The virus was successful temporarily. People built up their natural immunity and/or vaccine immunity. It's gone. Has to wait another year and doesn't come back as that strain. It might have to wait 30, 35 years before it comes back, and has enough people, susceptible for that. That's a little bit kind of high-level zoologic epidemiology, virologic epidemiology. You can take my word for it or not. Let's just look at what this actually comes down to as a pandemic. So let's see if I can get this up. It doesn't seem to be showing its picture. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to add this to the stream. So this is a thing I've been showing the last few weeks. It's covariance.org. So the ancestral strain is not listed here. That was back a year prior to these charts. But now we got the Greek alphabet, so we got confirmation: alpha, beta, gamma, delta, kappa, eta. I don't think these are in order from the Greek alphabet, but I could be wrong because I think there's a phi in there. But maybe they didn't choose to use it. Anyway, these are really complicated drawings. Maybe I can make this one a little bit larger. I don't know if that'll help or not. Maybe it doesn't help. But each one of these arcs is a different country. So when you go along here, you'll see the countries. At this particular date, these are the countries showing the alpha variant. And the numbers on the right are the frequency, that is to say, the percentage within that country that belongs to that strain. So in December 2020, nearly 60% of the COVID that was in the UK at the time was attributed to Alpha strain. So what did Alpha do in UK? Well, it's kind of gets tricky here unless you deselect all the countries and just pick the UK. So let's pick the UK and the USA, for instance. I don't know what other countries. We'll pick a few other countries of interest to kind of uncomplicate the charts a little bit. But we'll do Brazil because we worried about Brazil a while ago. Everyone was worried about India strain. So where's India? I passed it. I guess everyone's kind of worried about Israel. It was Italy. Where's India? I will do Germany and France just for fun, and pick some random country, say like Malaysia. No offense to Malaysians. We'll do Nigeria, and we'll maybe try Sweden because Sweden's interesting, and this should make it a little bit easier to look at. Or maybe do South Africa, so that was, I think, the beta strain. Okay, so this might be a little bit clearer. So you see the alpha went from country to country to country to country, and at the time in these countries it was the max. So if you look over here, the alpha strain was 2/3 of all the strains in the United States in May. Did we go nuts over it? I don't think so. Here's the beta strain. It seems to just on South Africa, not really much in other countries. If you look at Africa in general, you'll see more of it there. So this is geographic. The gamma strain was the Brazil strain last summer, this summer, I guess. Didn't really show other places, but again, if you go to the whole Earth, you'll see there were a lot of other places in South America. So a lot of these things are just happen to be the geographic strains. You know, they've mutated. People travel, they go to certain places. So this one got spread. Looks like, you know, a fair amount through Europe, and this one Africa, this one South and Central America. Delta was the India strain. How do we know that? Because it didn't exist until India, and then it probably got traveled to by airplane. You can see the UK showed up. There's a lot of Indian transnationals in the UK, and then after the UK, a lot of, you know, it's kind of a hub of travel and so forth. It went to a lot of other places. Now we're just talking about Delta, but it doesn't really matter because South Africa, without vaccine, and mind you, the vaccine they had is not necessarily the vaccine we have because they're getting a lot of the Chinese vaccine. Let's see if I can find South Africa here. So if we look at South Africa, I guess this is the beta strain. I guess I misspoke. I wanted to look at India, but while we're here, we'll look at South Africa. They had the beta strain over here. They had cases, and the cases kind of disappeared. They do exactly what everyone else has them do, and this is again with relatively low vaccination rates compared to the United States. They went down. Let's go check India. Is what I should have been checking. So here's India, again, without really much in the way of vaccine. The cases went up. This is all, as we saw just in the last page, Delta variant, the cases went up, they went down. The deaths went up, they went down. So without vaccine, India got rid of Delta. Is it a horrible, 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 horrible strain? No, this is the same Delta we're getting here. It's not horrible. You get it, you make it disappear. How do we know it's not horrible? Well, you can compare places that had not that much of COVID, that had a lot of COVID early on, like New York, and then what they're doing here. You can see the daily, you know, they're getting some cases. This is, you know, the ancestral strain. This is probably, you know, mix of, I don't know, maybe a second round of ancestral strain. Maybe this is the alpha strain here later on. And then they're getting Delta, yes, but the Delta is not really doing anything in New York. There's a high rate of vaccination and a high rate of background herd immunity, natural immunity. So why is New York going to get the same rules as, say, Texas, which had a different version and probably less penetration? A lot of the more rural places had less penetration than New York State did. Let's look at Florida. They had these various strains, the ancestral strain back in 2020, probably a rerun of that in 2021, and then they're off on Delta. So there were deaths. Florida is probably the oldest skewed demographic state in the country, or it is. And they had the Delta, just like India, they had it, it's gone away. So this is not, everyone was, getting on Ron DeSantis' case, literally cases, and they came, they went. Just like in India, the same thing will happen here. How do you know this will happen? Well, because the sun goes up, the sun goes down, and that's pretty much the way things go. The cases were not that bad in California, even though they share a border with Mexico. So they had some Delta cases here. These could very easily be through migration. You can see that Mexico is kind of a little bit behind us in terms of phase. They are going through the Delta strain right here. They're having more deaths per capita, than I believe, than we are right now. So they are having cases and they're having deaths. They're having a high infection fatality rate, probably because they don't test as much as we do, so they're not getting as many repeated testing on young people and so forth. They're probably testing more people who are more ill. If we just want to look at Sweden, they don't really get, like New York City, they're not really getting much in the way of cases of Delta, nor deaths, because they had a full round of herd immunity, leaving society open. So they have a much better profile than the United States does, because they let people mingle more, and they have a better profile than many countries in Europe, including I don't have them up right now, but most of the countries in Europe have done more lockdown and more ill effect on a freedom, social and economic basis, and without really much in the way of additional benefit. So I think Sweden did the right thing and right from the beginning. You can kind of pick country from country after that, where the cases go up. So I haven't really checked Thailand. I just pulled this one up randomly. This no doubt is a Delta variant. How can we check this? We can go to the Delta machine here and check Thailand. Let's see which one they're on. And yes, they're on Delta. So the way you read this one is what percentage, and it's really not how much. They could have 2 cases, but if 100% of those 2 cases were Delta, this would show up all green. So Delta is the flavor of the month in most places, not in the Philippines. They're still working on Alpha Beta. A lot of this is geographic. If we look back at Brazil, where's Brazil? I don't know why it show up here. It should have been, why isn't it showing up? Here's Brazil. So Brazil was working on the Gamma. I misspoke, because on the Gamma strain, and then they are getting a little bit more Delta. If you look at how their curve is going, mistake here. Brazil. So if we look at Brazil, we see they're having cases. They kind of went up, they went down. This is again Gamma strain. We're not hearing that much about, and the deaths are going down. So they're getting a little bit of Delta here. Maybe they might have another blip. Maybe they might not, because I think once you have immunity to one strain, like New York City was immune to the ancestral strain, and they're not really getting much in the way of immunity to. So here's New York again. They had the ancestral strain, and they're getting, the vaccines are to the ancestral strain, and they're not really getting much of a blip from Delta. So I doubt that Brazil will either. You shouldn't, if you're in the Northeast listening to this, you shouldn't be worrying about Delta. You shouldn't be doing all this stuff. If you're in places that didn't have as much of an early surge, and maybe on lower immunity, you might get Delta. But again, this on a person basis, your results may vary. If you are younger, you shouldn't be at huge worry from this, because the rates are pretty much nil. So again, going back to this concept early on of natural infection better at inducing immunity. So I found this from earlier, which I think it's unfortunate we're seeing so much skewed data. I maybe could do a Google search and get rid of the date filter, and you'll probably find something completely different. This is a pediatrician. Natural infection may induce stronger and longer lasting immunity than vaccines. Well, how do we know that? Well, first of all, immunity from disease follows a single natural infection. Immunity from vaccines usually occurs only after several doses, and in some cases wane with time. So all the stuff you're hearing different from this is likely wrong, and it's skewed by politics and time. So how do I say this? Well, let's just say it again. Let's read it again. Natural infection may induce stronger and longer lasting immunity than vaccines, whereas immunity from disease often follows a single natural infection. You're done. You had it. You're done. Immunity from vaccines occurs only after several doses. The fact you need a booster is ipso facto, prima facie evidence that it's not as good as natural infection at creating immunity. Not only that, but it's only giving you immunity to that spike protein. And he goes on to talk about waning immunity occurs with pertussis vaccine. And I don't want to go too far into this, but you can kind of follow along and read this. But I recommend using a time filter. The CDC, just on another aspect of immunization, which you may not hear very much, complications of immunization. Again, I use the time filter for this. So I think this is from 2018. This is from a PharmD, doctor of pharmacology, not a medical doctor. There are always caveats about people who shouldn't get a particular vaccine. So these are not, you can't be anti-vax. It's like saying I'm anti-raincoat. I don't wear a raincoat every day. I don't wear if I go to Aruba, it almost never rains. I'm not going to wear my raincoat. It's 90 degrees. It's sunny. I'm not going to wear a raincoat. Doesn't mean I don't like raincoats. It doesn't mean I don't respect raincoats. It doesn't mean I wouldn't wear a raincoat in the right circumstance. It doesn't mean I wouldn't bring a raincoat if I'm going to, Iceland or the Pacific Northwest and so forth. It depends. What you're going to do depends on what the circumstances are. You're an idiot if you don't do this otherwise. So they're looking at flu. So who shouldn't get it? Well, young children with a history of asthma or wheezing. Oh my God. Pregnant women should not get the flu vaccine. People with chronic diseases, I don't know why, heart disease, liver, should not get the flu. People who have compromised immune system. Okay, so there are always going to be some caveats. This is from the CDC. Hepatitis A vaccine. Have you had your hepatitis A vaccine? Well, if you haven't, are you an anti-vaxxer? No, you haven't encountered this. Not a problem for you. You're not going to be exposed to it. Why get the vaccine? Why give yourself the risk of having a problem from a vaccine for an illness you're not going to be exposed to? Hepatitis A. Now, if you are going to be exposed to it, you're going to, some kind of less careful, hygienic places. Yeah, fine, go for it. Get the hepatitis A vaccine if you want. So forth. You don't have to either. Same thing with hepatitis B. Same thing with all of these. And these go back and forth, based on your problems and issues. You don't have to get any of these things, and you shouldn't get them if they're not the right thing for you. What else? Are you an anti-vaxxer? If you recommend medication for a virus. So there's been this, thing where Joe Rogan took ivermectin and a bunch of other stuff. I'm not recommending ivermectin per se. I don't know if it works, so forth, but it's one of those things where you could take it because it's been safe. It's been in human FDA-approved medication, I think, since the 1960s, and its inventors got the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2015, and it's been an awesome drug. And they're looking at it for breast cancer, potential treatment, for malaria, potential treatment, for that. And again, this is before 2020, for viruses, paramyxovirus, and I discussed this on my last broadcast. And so if you recommend this, you're somehow a horrible, horrible person. You believe in horse dewormers. You should be shamed by the likes of Jimmy Kimmel and Howard Stern and Joe Biden and so forth. And you're an anti-vaxxer because you think medication. So the question is, if you have, God forbid, HIV, and you're taking medication instead of a vaccine, does that make you an anti-vaxxer? Well, there is no vaccine for HIV. So, all the time, this is ostensibly the time pre-vaccine for HIV. We're going on 37 years of it. No vaccine for HIV. I mean, frankly, millions of years. But in the known, human known experience of HIV, 37 years, and there's been no vaccine. So are you a bad person if you take medication for your HIV? No, you are doing the right thing because that is the best thing right now. At some point, there might be a vaccine for it. With those people who have the illness, should they get the vaccine? Probably not. I doubt it'll be recommended for people with HIV to get a vaccine. So once you've had the illness, that is unlikely to be the case that you're going to be recommended to get the vaccine afterwards. People who haven't had it, sure, why not? But they can't. They haven't been making it. They've tried to. HIV, apparently, there are a lot of constraints over it. It forms multiple variants that one person can get within one bolus from one other person. And so they're not just getting one HIV virus, the way oftentimes cough and sneeze you are. And so the immune system's overloaded by this. The fact the HIV actually attacks the immune system, probably another issue, and so forth. And there's also, I guess, out of all the 22 classes of virus, HIV is seemingly distinct insofar as there are glycoproteins on the surface of all viruses, but HIV has more glyco than protein, has more kind of sugar aspects, and maybe those kind of dissolve away like cotton candy, not able to get a good feel for it on an antibody antigen recognition basis. But anyway, leaving that stuff aside, everyone who has HIV is not anti-vax. They just don't have the vaccine and probably shouldn't take it even if there were one. That wouldn't make them anti-vax. These kind of epithets and kind of accusations are absurd, and it always comes down to what your problem is, what your issue is. I'm totally pro-vax for the people who find themselves at risk on an actuarial basis, on a personal basis, or they want to take it, fine. But this concept that what the long-term side effects are from something that hasn't been around for the long term are absurd. There are going to be issues and so forth and problems because they have been for every vaccine ever. I think a genuine anti-vaxxer would be somebody who persists in conspiracy theories many years after the fact. I think it's somewhat been disproved that autism is a result of certain of the childhood vaccines. I don't think there was a strong begin with. But I don't think you're an anti-vaxxer or absurd or conspiracy theorist if you think that there's a higher risk of myocarditis and other issues of that order from the COVID vaccine than there would be from the disease itself, which has a mortality of essentially zero for everybody, healthy under 25 or 30, whatever the cutoff you want to choose. Anyway. I don't know if I've addressed the things I want to address. I mean, I hope so, in part. I recommend that you keep an open mind for this. You try to cut through the BS. What else is there? I mean, there were a few memes that I thought were interesting. Maybe I'll close with these. This one's a little bit raunchy, so I apologize. And I'll leave it up just for a second. This is celebrities. I don't know where this was exactly. All up and close athletes. This is the NBA championship, and your kids. We have our kids. Socially distanced, wearing absurd masks and so forth. These kids are at infinitesimal risk. Probably 10 to 100 times less risk than these young adults, and probably 1,000 to 10,000 times less at risk than your oldsters and who are getting the brunt of the mortality at nursing home level in their 80s and so forth with comorbidities. This is one I found from a stream of very pleasant, smart, left-leaning person. I don't think he wrote it, but he endorses it. I wear my mask in public for 3 reasons: humility, kindness, community. You can read through these issues. I think kindness and community extend to children. If you can't be kind, the worst people on earth are people who are mean to their pets because the pets have no recourse and so forth. Kids are on that similar level. If you can be cruel to our most vulnerable, the kind of simplest amongst our society, and treat our children the way you would treat prisoners, I don't think humility and kindness are really going to be factoring in. I don't think you're creating community in that way. I understand. I think that they even understand there's not really that much science, especially in places like New York City, which are highly immune already. This is another quickie. I apologize for the handwriting aspect, but it's year after year after year, all the things that are going to kill us: Y2K, anthrax, West Nile, SARS, year after year, bird flu, E. coli, financial collapse, swine flu, the Mayan calendar, North Korea, Ebola virus, ISIS, Zika virus. This is the one I've actually been writing on. I've got a page called Zika Remembered, because people, even though it's 5 years ago, people have forgotten coronavirus. The truth is, fear is going to kill you. That might do it for my meme aspect of today's episode. Let's see if I have any others that I'm willing to share with you. I guess very briefly, this is kind of a, I don't really know what this means. This is kind of my artistic side, if you will. I find these things everywhere. There's a mask, and I've been taking pictures of them. Why? Because I think, I don't know what it says exactly. People have them, they toss them. Do they care about these masks? Do they believe in them? Do they, at any rate, they're just one more trash thing. And I'd like to maybe make an exhibit of these. If you have contributions, you want to send them along, you can pop them in. I guess there's another one here. Past infection may protect against Delta. May better protect against Delta than vaccine, but putting yourself at risk of dying to have natural immunity is not a great trade-off. Well, this gets back to some of these other points made from the Department of Health. It really, it depends what your situation is, and whether the illness is that bad. And again, I'm pro-vaccine for the people who need it, oldsters and so forth. I've mentioned many times that this is an awesome thing, and it gives you probably 20-year reduction in your risk profile. So if you're an 80-year-old, you go from the risk factor that was prior to vaccine to that of a 60-year-old without vaccine. And so that's awesome. But 10-year-olds don't need to get to -10. 20-year-olds don't need to get to 0. They're already at those numbers. They're already at really, really low levels. Anyway, so that's kind of it for our special edition. And please share it widely. I've had some issues with Facebook not wanting to let these things get around. I don't think I'm subversive. I'm pretty much going on a factual basis. And maybe if that becomes subversive, then there are issues with those who choose to censor this. I just give you one anecdote to end. When I was a kid, and I was at one point, you may not have it, I remember just kind of roaming. We had an apartment, roaming around the apartment, and some cabinet. I don't know, reaching up, and my mom's like, "No, no, 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 get away from that cabinet." I'm like, "Oh," and I did, but for a while, I mean, it was hard. I was kind of out of my reach, but I was like, "Huh, what is the deal? What's so interesting about that cabinet?" And at a point where I could, get a step stool or something, and she wasn't around, I opened it up and I found these bottles of liquor. I didn't partake of them at the time, but it was like, oh, those are, what is that? And I didn't really have a concept, but the fact that when people don't want you to look at something, that only gives you more reason to do so. And when people order you to do something, conversely, it's because they can't let you decide on your own that's something you need to do. If by this point, a year and a half in, that the government or the talking heads or Dr. Fauci haven't convinced you personally at, say, age 25 or potentially pregnant that you should get a vaccine, well, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you are right and they are wrong. That doesn't make you a bad person. It might make you unable to go to work. It might put you away from a flight. That's sad, but political power does work, and you have to work on that. It's not to say that it's not going to have ramifications and repercussions for people who make a stand, but barring that, you'll have to live with consequences. I don't think they're large consequences, but we really can't tell what they are. And certainly many, many places on Earth, as I've shown you already, have dealt with these various strains as they come up without vaccine. Brazil had the Gamma strain, South Africa had the Beta strain, and lots of places in the Middle East had the Alpha strain, and now India had the Delta strain. All had them, and they got rid of them in exactly the same fashion. And the places that had one strain didn't really have a problem with the other strain afterwards. So natural immunity works. Vaccines can also work, but not quite as well or fully. And vaccines should be taken by people who can't really conscience or encounter the full brunt of the natural infection itself. And in this case, for coronavirus, that's people with comorbidities, obesity, and old age, and some combination of the above. All right, so I'm going to be signing off after that. Questions, comments, criticisms, please let me know. Please share this widely. And if you have suggestions of things you'd else like to hear, please let me know. Have a good